Welcome to the Job Dream Podcast, where we discuss the best and worst parts of jobs with the people that actually work them. This is the best place to get an inside look at all different types of jobs to help you decide if it could be the dream job for you. Okay, we are back with another fantastic episode. This week we have Eric Mariasis on. He is a software engineer, and he is going to take us through his entire process from when he started out in high school and first found his passion in math all the way through college and getting his internships. The big thing I want to make you guys focus on, or hope you guys focus on today, is his description of the interview process. In a lot of different careers, there are different kinds of interviews, and each one is unique. I've myself interviewed in a lot of different jobs, and to be honest, I've always been pretty good at interviewing. I've always just taken it as a time where I get to talk about all my great qualities. And a couple tips I'll give is, go in there pretty confident. You should be happy. This is, the game time. You've done all the hard work. So being nervous in the interview process doesn't really help you very much. Even if you are, be genuine about it. Some kind of basic interview questions might say, what's your greatest strength and greatest weakness? I think for a lot of the younger folks, a great weakness to talk about, because I think everyone talks about their strengths pretty honestly and is excited about that, but weakness is always that tougher one to go after. One that I used when I was younger was, my lack of management experience. And say, hey, I've always done really good in my entry level jobs, but I haven't had that chance to, lead other people, and that's the thing I'm excited to, work on here. It can kind of pair with, what kind of questions do you have for me? Mine is, what is the path looking like at this job? That really shows that you do want to be there for a long time, that you want to get to the higher level. And a lot of times that level is management. So being honest and saying, hey, I want to be a leader in this company, but I don't have that much experience is a great way to show at an entry level job that you do plan on sticking around for a long time, and that's something that, you do want to work on. Um, in Eric's case, he does also show you a couple of different paths of where you can go, whether you want to lead projects or lead people or do a combination of both. He talks about the difference between, being a programmer, being a software engineer, and how there isn't just one way to get there. He did do the traditional 4-year route, but he describes that there are many paths to get to where he is today. He also briefly talks about how much you can make, starting out, and how much you can make going forward. So that's always really interesting to know. This is definitely one of the higher end career paths, and it's really exciting that Eric kind of breaks down all of that for you. You can find him. He also does tutoring available if you want to get a job like his, or if you just need help in math. He has his own business. You can find his Twitter at EMAR829. That's probably the best place to message him directly. And he also has a website that we'll give off at the end of the show, where you can hire his tutoring services. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get right into it. Thank you so much. All right, Eric. Well, thank you for being here with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to speaking about how I got into software engineering. So I guess I'll get right into it.
Yeah, usually
I'll
you
start.
start, in high school. Like, did you have any first jobs in high school? Any, kind of remedial or just kind of boring jobs, or how did that all start?
Yeah, in high school, the kind of jobs I was looking for was more like working at the grocery store or sort of at local places. I hadn't looked ahead yet to sort of internships or software engineering, but I was always told by my friends and my family that from a very young age, I would, like at 2 years old, I would sit at the computer and like install applications. Apparently, I got into that pretty early, but I didn't start the programming side or really studying software engineering at all until college. So high school and sort of earlier than that, I always knew I was interested in sort of a mathematical area or like the engineering realm. I always have had sort of a logical thinking mind. But definitely, even as late as senior year of high school, I had no idea how exactly I wanted to apply those strengths, like in college. So my path was very interesting because like a lot of people I know who get into software engineering, some of them, knew since they were 12 years old that they wanted to program, and that's certainly some software engineers, but that by no means has to be how anyone gets into it. I mean, I got into it in college. There are people who make career pivots to it, when they're in their 30s or even later than that. You can start anytime, it's never too late to learn. So basically, when I went to college, I knew that I wanted to major in some kind of engineering. I actually specifically went to an engineering school. They also had a liberal arts school where I went. So basically, what I ended up doing was I sort of tried a bunch of different engineering disciplines. Like I took sort of an intro class related to, say, mechanical engineering, civil engineering, chemical, um, and right off the bat, there were a couple of them that just didn't seem like they would be a great fit for me. Maybe now it would be better, but like at the time, I sort of took all these intro classes, and one of them happened to be an elective in computer science because that's sort of software engineering is what it's called in industry, but when if you study it in college, it's a computer science curriculum.
Okay. Before we
So
get
I
into that though, I mean, in high school you're working at a grocery store and you're pretty good at math. You're taking, I would assume, like an SAT type situation, and you're going to college. Is that
I
the path?
yeah, so yeah, basically what I did was I sort of studied really hard in most of my classes, focusing on sort of the mathematical areas, especially. But I always worked very hard in school, and um, I actually one of the busters was a calculus, but I learned so much from that, and I ended up taking it in college as well. But yeah, I sort of I took like the SATs, I took several of the subject tests. I took pretty much not all the advanced placement classes offered, but several of them in my high school. Like I definitely tried to challenge myself in terms of the curriculum, and that's certainly not a path you have to go if you are going into software engineering. Like you don't even have to be necessarily study oriented. That's just so happens that's the path I took, and that's what got me interested in the engineering curriculum in the first place. And yeah, and
And
I never actually ended up like working anywhere locally in high school, but that was just to illustrate what kind of my mindset was in terms of jobs back then. I sort of thought I
okay,
only knew what was local.
so that's fine though. No,
So
no job in high school, and then you got into college. Are you on the East Coast, or what kind of schools are you looking at?
so I do live on the East Coast. I'm from Massachusetts, like a little near the Boston area, and yeah, so there's a lot of schools in the area. I wasn't looking exclusively there. I happened to go to a school in Massachusetts, but I definitely was looking for a school that had an engineering curriculum, and I liked the school that I ended up going to because um, it had an engineering school, but it also had other kinds of subjects because I kind of liked a bunch of different subjects. So yeah, so essentially, so I started off with an elective in computer science, and I liked it. I thought it was very interesting. I didn't know a lot yet about how programs worked, and definitely something that's important to know if you want to get into software engineering is don't be too worried if it's not something you grasp right away. Like it's something where if you start at it, it can feel confusing. It can feel like it's like basically learning new languages and a new way of thinking. And don't let that deter you. I think the one place where I could have done better in the beginning was asking for help, like asking people who are more experienced than me, seeking out tutors or TAs. I was very stubborn and tried to do everything all on my own, and it cost me a lot of time. And actually, so I took a few of the intro classes, but then there was this one class at college for computer science majors that was notoriously difficult. And actually, because I didn't really ask a lot of people for help, I actually got to a point where like I almost dropped the major. And I was like very overwhelmed. And the message there is, I persevered, but basically, if you're stuck, get help wherever you can. And people are generally friendly and willing to assist. And like one thing is I myself am also a tutor, so so I know that students, it's okay to need help outside of the curriculum, like that's no problem, and it makes you smarter and
Okay. And was
more
this one of
well-rounded.
the first times maybe in your entire life that you really kind of went up against something that you didn't excel at?
Yeah, so well, I guess so the first time academically was I mentioned it a little bit, but I took calculus senior year of high school, and that was the first course that really like pushed my brain. It was a new way of thinking at the time, and I couldn't just sort of not that I posted classes before, but before I didn't have to put in a lot of effort, but that class was sort of the first major struggle. I mean, I had struggled athletically before that. Like I ran throughout middle school and high school, and I was a good sprinter, but my distance running was not the best. So that I consider that a bit of a struggle too. But yeah, calculus was very challenging. But yeah, I mean, in terms of college, like it was a new kind of struggle. Like it wasn't even about whether I would get an A or a B in the class. Like sometimes I would wonder if I would even pass the course. And again, it was because probably up to that point, I didn't need a lot of help in my academics. Wasn't conditioned to sort of seek that out. Um, but but yeah, but definitely that course that I'm talking about, I took a junior year of college, and yeah, very different experience. I worked with partners for most of the assignments, and that was great. Um, but yeah, like sometimes you feel like you completely don't know what you're doing, but that's okay. A lot of times in life you may feel like you don't know what you're doing, but luckily now there's so many ways to learn things, get help. And I think that the other thing that's important is, whether you're learning software engineering or anything else, is to try to discover the way you learn. Because like for me personally, um, so software engineering as a career, one thing that's great about it is it never gets boring. Like there's always something new you could be discovering or learning or implementing, to make your work better. And one of the ways I learned best to do that is by like taking courses through like a Udemy or a Pluralsight kind of um, kind of place. I like sort of the structure initially, and then I go off and sort of try to build my own projects, whether it be on my own or with the assistance of a mentor to work with me. Um, but yeah, so I took that course. I took one thing that was also really tricky about my path to software engineering was since I was in the engineering school, um, I was taking, I was trying to take all the general engineering classes alongside the concentration computer science courses where, I think if someone studies software engineering, I think it's honestly learned best if you kind of learn it on its own. Like, you learn the computer science theory, you learn all of that, but also trying to take the other engineering classes, made it, so much more challenging. And that I think that part of, was part of the contributing factor to why, I was almost ready to throw in the towel at times. But
And my question is what made you not throw in the towel? Because I know, in college, there's a lot of people that they get that tough class and they say, hey, maybe this isn't right for me. Were you genuinely just really excited about this subject? or is it maybe something inside you that says, I'm not the kind of person that
Yeah.
quits, or what made you
Mhm.
stick it out?
Yeah, I mean, it was a couple different things for me. I mean, one is that I I try, and I think I mainly, mainly succeeded in kind of seeing the path ahead and seeing that, if I get through this course, that will lead me to a great path. Like I can work at like this company I want to work at. I can program for them and do, what I've always been hoping to do in college. And I also told myself that, not that I thought I would fail the course, but that, in the event that that happened, people take courses again. It's not the end of the world. Luckily I pulled through, but there are people who do things, and I think there's some statistic that something like half of engineers like go beyond 4 years or something like that, and that's okay. Like it
Okay,
doesn't
that's good to
make
know.
you, yeah, yeah.
But you already
So
had a mindset of a job you were thinking about doing after college. It sounds like you're like, hey, I could work for this company. What kind of companies were you interested in working for?
yeah, I mean, I think that like at the time that I was taking that course, I think I was largely thinking with the crowd about, I wanted to work at sort of one of the, the high end sort of like we would call FANG companies, like, like Facebook Meta or like Amazon, Netflix. Um, but ultimately I discovered I didn't want to work at any of those companies, but it was sort of a good goal to strive for. Like, okay, if I get through these really challenging programming theory, software courses, it can give me a chance to work at those companies, and it was kind of something to strive towards. And but yeah, seeing the goal line definitely helped me a lot, and also like talking with friends. Like I had friends at school who kind of encouraged me to continue, and having a good support system is very important too. If you
Okay.
can. So
So let's say you graduated college, you got through the major. What is this like your first job that you're looking at ever, or just your first job in a field that you really want to work in?
yeah, so basically what my path ended up being was in kind of the first, sort of the first half of college, like probably after sophomore year. I started working internships that were in the field of software. So I
Okay.
definitely advocate, especially since software engineering is so practical, and the best way to learn is by doing that. If you can sort of do an internship or two, if you're in college, of course, but you can do internships at any time. But doing an internship to learn is so valuable. So I did that. I did some practical application in those. I learned a lot doing that, in the summer, and then so after I did those couple internships, combined with the curriculum, then that gave me the confidence to apply for those jobs sort of after I graduated from college. Now I will say that there's so many different paths to being a software engineer. Like I happened to take the sort of the traditional 4 year college route to get there, but by no means is that the only way. I mean, there are people in software engineering who studied completely unrelated subjects, like they're biology majors, or take your pick. There are people, you can get into software engineering having any sort of background as long as you have the discipline and sort of the willpower to learn, and the willingness. So the other thing that's interesting about software engineering, and when you're applying for software engineering jobs, is it's one of those interesting fields where the interview process to to get a software engineering job is often a lot different than the kind of thing you'll actually do in the job. Like there's a whole industry around like preparing for the interviews. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that when you study software engineering, then there's also this studying for the interviews is also kind of like studying for a standardized test. Like there are these websites with coding problems, and it's definitely a little different than you'll see in the job. But having those internships, if you can get them, is a good way to get experience. If you can't get internships, there are definitely plenty of other ways to do practical projects. Like you can do what's called, contribute to what's called open source projects, which is writing code for a big project that's available online to write code for, and you can sort of, you can write code and sort of like get it reviewed and then integrate it into there. So that's a way to learn.
All right, well, let's
So
talk a little bit about the interviewing process. I know a lot of
yeah,
people would be interested in maybe getting a leg up, and you're saying it's pretty different. What is your first interview look like when you're, first applying out of college?
yeah. Probably after I graduated. So a lot of the interviews for software engineering are sort of working on a coding problem that you have like a defined amount of time to solve, because you like it during an interview you don't have enough time to solve a major pressing company problem. So a lot of the interview process is centered around sort of almost like puzzle problems, but in often the language of your choice, like whether you program in Java or some other language. But yeah, practicing for those interviews, there are a lot of websites to practice for those, like LeetCode.com or like HackerRank, that have these problems that you're supposed to be able to solve in like 30 minutes or less. I mean, not every company interviews like that. And that's a certain subset, especially like if you want to get into the more prestigious places. But also a skill is pretty much every company will ask you, like talk about yourself, why you think you're qualified, what technologies do you have experience with, like a lot of it is sort of being able to market yourself and say why you'd be a great fit for the job.
Do you
Yeah,
have
so in
an
terms of,
example of like a question you might get asked? Is it like, how many tennis balls can you fit in an airplane type of thing,
oh
or?
no. So yeah,
Oh,
an example might be like write write code, like write code about how to traverse like a two-dimensional board of some sort. Like that's just an example, and then you would like write loops for that. They're I think of another
so are they giving
example
you a
thinking about.
computer, or is it just like you're in a room by yourself, or are you with like a group of people and you're all kind of doing this test together, or what does that scenario look like?
Oh, for the interviews. So I mean, typically you're doing it on your own, maybe on a screen share with the interviewer, and usually maybe they like give you a puzzle via like a collaborative platform, almost like a Google Docs but for code. Like there's a bunch of different kinds of those, but often so you like collaborate with the interviewer, and they would give you a prompt for the problem, and then maybe they would ask you, choose what language you would like to code this in, and then um, and then another great thing for the software interviews is to make sure you communicate your thought process, because what a lot of people do is they might sit there thinking about the problem, but the interviewer doesn't know what's going through your head unless you tell them what you're thinking. So
Mhm.
even if you don't get a problem correct, you might still get evaluated positively if you explain a good thought process, but maybe just don't have the time to finish. So yeah, so being communicative about your thought process, writing the code, is also important during the interview process.
Okay.
So
So you got your first job. Is it at a big company or a small company?
yeah, so I've pretty much been exclusively working at relatively big companies, like over a few thousand employees. The first company I worked at was like over 60,000.
Oh wow.
So I've been working at large companies. So I would say that, so the interview processes for the companies that I ended up working at were more sort of conversational and asking, like either what, if it was a first job out of school, it would ask me like what kind of courses did you take, what did you learn while you were in school, and like what kind of experience do you have. And then as you get further in your career, it's more about like what is your career experience, what technologies have you used during your career, like what are some struggles you've faced, how do you solve like problems when they come up, a lot of
Okay.
scenarios like that.
So
occur.
yeah, let's talk about the career progression. So what would you say an average starting salary is, on the East Coast when you're coming into a big company like you did?
Yeah, so it really does depend. I mean, when I graduated, it was probably like about almost 10 years ago now. I think a good starting salary at like a big company was probably like a little under 100K per year. But I mean, nowadays, I mean, depending on what kind of company you join, that can vary widely. Like some of the FANG companies can pay several $100,000 a year. But yeah, I would say probably typical nowadays, for like any sort of prestigious company, it's probably in like the low six figures, like 100,000. But don't get discouraged. That's a little less, for your first job. There's definitely a lot of potential to earn. So in terms of the career path, um, you know, often or almost always you started with what's called an individual contributor, which is just you're a software engineer who's like writing code for a team and completes what are usually called user stories. And what a user story is like, the client wants this kind of feature, and wants this feature delivered within a certain time period, and then you as the software engineer are responsible for writing code, for the to satisfy the requirements. Um, so,
Okay, so that makes sense. So you're kind of, I mean, a real employee. You're not really coming up with your own ideas yet. You're carrying out tasks for some senior
yeah,
people, and I imagine they're kind of
right.
checking your work at that point, making sure everything is correct.
Yeah, so that's at the beginning, and then often what happens. So there are a few different career paths that tend to be possible when you're a software engineer. So almost everyone starts at that individual contributor, but then so some software engineers want to kind of like climb the typical ranks, like up to like a management style position. Like they want to deliver really well in software engineering, like become a senior software engineer, and then maybe eventually want to like become a people manager. That's one path. Not that's not always what happens. Another path is what I call the architect path. Um, so again, you kind of like become a senior software engineer, but then instead of managing people, you become like a major designer for the product, for the software of some major product, and you get to come up with architecting can be very difficult and fulfilling at the same time. It's basically coming up with the big picture design of a product. So a lot of people strive for that path because it has a lot of influence over something. You can be making a difference, and it can give you great career experience and communicating the design of the software and the domain. And I know a lot of great software architects at the companies I've worked at. Um,
And what
and
path would you
then
say you're on?
so yeah, I think ideally for me, I think I want to go, somewhere in between the pure people leading path and the sort of architect path. Like I think I might want to be an engineering manager. So like be a manager, but maybe more focused on the engineering side rather than just purely like sort of your typical manager. But so in addition to those paths talked about, that I just talked about, a lot of software engineers too just kind of want to remain individual contributors and just have, sort of more and more influence on, sort of the individual side of things. So some people may not necessarily want to become an architect or be a people manager. They may just want to, be a more experienced engineer and have more domain knowledge about the code and just continue individual contributing. And additionally, these any path that you decide to take isn't necessarily permanent. I know people who um, they were individual contributors, they were managers, and then they discovered, what? I don't want to be a manager. I actually want to go back to individual contributing. So then they go back to doing that. So it doesn't have to be a straight line. You can sort of move laterally or take a different path altogether if you want to. That's totally acceptable as well.
Okay. And what would you say is kind of the hardest part about, the path that you're on?
Yeah, well, so I'll start by saying the hardest part of software engineering is not writing the code. I think a lot of people that it is difficult initially, perhaps, to learn how to write code, but that's just sort of a tool to get the job done. I think the hardest part is when you're presented with a problem, coming up with like how do you approach it? Like what technology should I use? What language should I use? What framework should I use? Is this deliverable in a certain amount of time? And then also sometimes it's, a lot of the difficulty for me is just sort of mental, saying that, like I will solve this problem, you know, I'll get it done. Sometimes I think I won't solve the problem, but, um, I always do the best I can, like thinking on my own, talking to people on my team, getting, soliciting feedback and asking for help when you need it is very important. But yeah, I think that, uh, yeah, software engineering can be a very fulfilling career, and it doesn't have to be forever. You can go a variety of different paths for your career, um, and you can sort of, you can get out of it whatever you want to put into it. It's it can be wonderful.
It also seems like, all the cool features of the phone and the computer and so much of our world. Are you saying that a lot of those decisions are made by, software engineers, or is there, people that have, you know, completely different jobs that are creating these kinds of, kind of cool tools and features that we're all using?
Yeah, I mean, software engineers can certainly have an influence. I mean, I think that, for something major like, say, a phone application, there's probably a lot of software engineers working with like what's called a UX designer, like a interface designer that comes up with sort of the layout of how things look. So like in my current role, a lot of what I do is, one part of software is what's called front end software, which is writing code for like what appears on the screen when you go on a website. So, software engineers a lot of times write the code to make that happen, but then there's often a whole different set of people that actually come up with like what that's supposed to look like, sort of the roadmap of, how should this site look and feel? Like, what should you need to click on? How should it function? So like, so that's called UX design. They come up with a plan, and then the software engineers would sort of figure out, what kind of code do I need to write to make that happen. So,
Okay.
so yeah, I mean, another thing I love about software engineering is, it's so satisfying to see sort of like something come out of nothing. Like you write code from, basically thin air. You can, see really cool stuff working. You can automate a lot of things. You can, it's just so satisfying seeing it run and function.
And I think, terms that get thrown around a lot are, programmer and software engineer. What would you say the biggest, difference is between those two?
Yeah, so I think programming tends to focus on the code writing portion of software engineering. So it tends to focus on, how do I make the code work? What's the style of the code? It's sort of more narrowly focused, but software engineering includes coding, but it's a lot more than that. It's about how should the problem be approached? How do I, who do I need to collaborate with to figure out what to do? It's sort of more, I guess the short summary is I think software engineering also encompasses more of more of how the business works, and what you have to do as a business person to get the program to customers rather than just writing the code, which is important, but there are other things to it as well.
Excellent. And it seems like, yeah, you're doing very well in your career and you've progressed. How do you feel about, changing jobs? I think a lot of young people, are under the impression that, every 18 months it's okay to leave a job. I think the
Mhm.
older, generation is, you should stay at a job for, 5 or 6 years. Where do you kind of stand on
Right.
that with progression?
Yeah, I mean, there can certainly be value, to having at least a job or two on your resume that you've stayed at for for a few years. But I don't see a problem with switching jobs if if there's a good reason for it. If you think there's something that fits your skill set better, or or just that you want to do more, or if you want a bump in pay. I think I think nowadays people don't have as much of an issue with others switching jobs as maybe in the past. Maybe if you have 5 jobs of which every single one of them is 6 months or less, like that could be a red flag. But it's very common to maybe try a few different jobs before you find one that really fits you. So I definitely have a positive mindset in terms of switching jobs if you think it's best for you. Like I don't think you should ever be afraid, to look for something new if it if you think it will be better for you. I certainly think, especially if you're in a job for a really long time in software, you can sometimes be pigeonholed in terms of like what you're paid, and it can be hard to get substantial raises. And when you're in software, a lot of times the best way to get pay bumps is by switching companies. That can often be the best way. And there's always some risk to switching companies, but there's also risk to staying and being paid lower than your potential.
Excellent. That's very valuable. And I really thank you for, taking the time to speak with us today. The last thing I really just want to go over is that I see on your website that you do offer tutoring services in a number of different, applications: Java, C++, Docker, Perl, and then
Mhm.
also math, statistics, geometry, pre-calculus, algebra. What can we expect if someone, signed up for your course, and, what kind of age ranges are you focusing on?
Yeah, so I tended to focus on people from probably like late high school all the way through to adult. A lot of students I tutor are university students who are either in programming courses or sort of a variety of like math courses like statistics or something like that. And then I also work with adults who either want to get into programming or are taking programming courses like as part of a master's or something like that. And I think can make a huge difference, because a lot of the reason that I got into tutoring in the first place is because of sort of that experience I had in college where I didn't really ask for a lot of help. And now knowing that students can benefit from a service like this, I think I can make a big difference in people's success by doing this.
Excellent. And where can we book it? I have ERICMARIASIS.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's one way. I can also give. So I probably do need to revamp my site a little bit. But you can also find me on Twitter at EMAR829. If you want to get in touch with me, and if you want tutoring, or if you just want to ask me questions about software engineering, I'm happy to hear from your audience. But I really enjoyed being here today.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. And I wish you the best of luck, and hopefully we can get some people getting some tutoring from you.